It echoes through our bones. It reverberates in our souls. The eternal drumbeat of time never ceases. It is a melody we must understand, as its rhythm determines our future as much as our past. And so, the Royal Academy presents in this film a complete timeline of all events we know to have transpired in our world. We concluded the previous episode at the Great Dragon Calamity, the catastrophe that saw the Shrade Kingdom burned to ash by the Black Dragon. Now, we move into the era after the calamity, the burned world in which our ancestors picked up the shards of the past and began building the societies that we know today. The world after the Dragon Calamity was one in which many new groups and nations were born. Some survived and thrived in the aftermath, becoming the cities and towns we know today. Others, meanwhile, emerged briefly before disappearing again. One example of the latter was the Order of the Iron Knights, a band of warriors unaffiliated with any of the currently known nations. While they called themselves knights, they were most akin to treasure hunters, as they obsessively collected old weapons made from dragon materials. Their leader was said to be on a mission to unravel the mystery of the dragon riders and revive their secret techniques that allowed them to tame and ride monsters. Whether this ambition was ever fulfilled is unknown, as the Iron Knights disappeared alongside their leader before long, once again shrouding the secret of dragon riding in obscurity. But some of the ascendant groups from the aftermath of the calamity displayed more longevity. From the ashes of the Shrade Kingdom arose two nations, built by surviving lords and ministers. They were the two shards of the Great Kingdom, East Shrade and West Shrade. For a variety of reasons, the two nations could not see eye to eye, leading to tensions and conflict. In the end, a neutral buffer zone around the now destroyed Castle Shrade was erected, with the city of Veld serving as the capital of West Shrade, while Liber became the capital of East Shrade. Of the two, West Shrade was significantly more prosperous, ruling over fertile and gentle lands. On its southern border, West Shrade established a small town carved into a rock face, a place they called Minegard. At the time, this town was considered a marginal no man's land, as it bordered monster territory and was far away from the protective walls and artillery of Veld City. It was around this time that the world was, in the eyes of the Shradians at least, split in two. Cities and civilian zones were the civilized regions, while the areas in which monsters roamed were named the Frontier. Minegard was thus West Shrade's outpost that peered into the frontier, a necessary backwater that the nobles of the cities would rather forget about. Other cities dealt with other problems around this time. While Dundorma had been seemingly spared from the wrath of dragons and had survived the time of calamity, trouble still stirred in the great frontier city. The original Dragonator, the great pride of Dundorma, suddenly vanished, leaving the town devastated and haunting its leader until his dying day. While we now know that the Dragonator would eventually end up in the clutches of a giant dragon, How such a creature could possibly steal the weapon completely unseen remains a mystery. Overall, the period following the Dragon Calamity was one of strife and agonizing reconstruction. Simultaneously, new customs aimed at preventing a second calamity through spiritual means began emerging in various places. For one example, the frozen archipelago where the doomed battleship had fought Azor Magdaros and perished became known around this period as the Frost Islands. Various native tribes and sailors passed through this region, and in the process left behind numerous objects of worship and spiritual relevance. Chief among them was the small shrine erected on the skull of the deceased dragon, seemingly an attempt at calming the dead beast's spirit and avert draconic vengeance from beyond. It is also believed that these rituals eventually became regular activities for some tribes, as evidenced by the construction of walkways and bridges that allow for easy access to the shrines and temples in the area. It was around this time that another political power arose: the Nameless Kingdom, which emerged in a region separated from our main continent by an ocean strait. This nation, which began building a standing army of knights and warriors, continued to grow and expand in its distant homeland. But alas, even the sporadic victories of mankind did not slow the growth of the frontier, and we have evidence of numerous settlements and nations falling to the encroaching nature of this period. One such place was Old Moga, which was one day beset by terrible seaquakes that shook the entire island. Tsunamis and quakes were not uncommon in the region, and the Old Mogans had rebuilt their town many times in their mission to watch over their ancestors' ruins. But these tremors were simply too much. The entire village slipped into the sea, and its people were forced to leave. While we now know that this was likely the work of an underwater elder dragon, the people of Old Moga must have thought themselves cursed, and a deep desire to reclaim their lost home would be passed down through the generations. Thus did the wheel of time turn, with settlements falling to the ferocity of nature, the frontier a wild and ever-expanding realm ruled by monsters. One reason for this dynamic is believed to have been the complete lack of specialized warriors able to fight back against monsters. While soldiers and mercenaries were liberally employed in various human conflicts, no one had any illusions about hunting down monsters. Tales of men that could battle wyverns existed merely in mythology, and groups like the ancient heroes of Shrade were nothing more than distant cultural memories. No, at this time, when a Rathian wandered into a village, its citizens had no recourse but to evacuate and hope the beast didn't start building a nest. Fear, displacement, and trembling returns. It was no way to live, and so more and more settlements fell to abandonment as the people concentrated further and further into the already established civilized regions. This was a world of monsters, and mankind simply endured their supremacy. But this would not be the case for much longer. The first rumors began in the east, near the area where Jumbo Village now stands. Here, a village had found itself in the path of a Laoshan lung. Called mountain dragons, these colossal beings only rarely move, but when they do, they destroy everything in their path just by walking. If a village at this time heard of a Laoshan lung coming their way, the usual consequence was a complete evacuation, people fleeing their homes, knowing that even if they returned later, all they would find would be rubble and debris crushed beneath giant dragons' feet. But this time was different. As the rumor went, one villager stayed behind, a young Wyverian. The young man then, unbelievably, went on to battle the dragon, armed only with a short blade fashioned from bone and metal. And, against all odds, the young Wyverian slayed the Lao Shan Lung. More than just that, it is said that the young man plunged his sword into the skull of the dragon with such force that the ground beneath them gave way, the dragon's corpse being entombed in the very earth it had previously crushed beneath its claws, sword still stuck in its head. One can hardly imagine what it must have been like to hear this story at the time. For generations upon generations, monsters were an unavoidable disaster, as natural and inevitable as hurricanes or volcanic eruptions. But then here stood a Wyverian, a mere man, baptized in the final breath of a slain dragon, vanquished through blade and will alone. It must have been like watching a man catch a lightning bolt in his bare hands. Suddenly, the impossible seemed possible. Suddenly, there was hope. Other legends would end here. A mysterious young man defeats a powerful dragon and then vanishes back into the fog of history. But no, this hero's story had barely even begun. After his slaying of the Lao Shan Lung, this young Wyverian began making a name for himself, appearing all across the lands just in time to battle some foul beast and emerge victoriously from the struggle. Before long, other warriors joined his journey, a beautiful maiden warrior and a legendary blacksmith among them, and the troop soon counted 5, whose bodies and souls were dedicated to the battle against wyverns and beasts. While the term did not quite exist yet, these were the very first monster hunters, and the young hero is now considered the originator of this lifestyle. The story of the first troop of monster hunters is a tale of bravery and heroism, of mortal will triumphing over the feral strength of wyverns. But, like all legends, it too had to come to an end. One day, the troop learned of a ferocious wyvern that had begun nesting on Mount Kokoto, a mountain southeast of Minegard. This creature was a monoblos, a terrible flying wyvern with an enormous spiral horn on its nose. Undeterred, the troop lunged into battle against the wyvern and suffered dearly for it. The details of this struggle are lost to history, but what is known is that the hunters' troop suffered a brutal loss at the tip of the monoblos's horn, culminating in the death of the maiden warrior whom the hero had intended to marry. One would imagine the loss of his fiancée would have crushed the young man. But instead, the Wyverian hero took up his swords once more and jumped back into the fray, this time facing the monoblos alone. And once the dust settled after untold hours or days of fighting, it was the young hero who stood victorious, his love avenged, his enemy slain. If there was one singular moment that heralded the birth of monster hunting, then it was this: the day the young Wyverian became known as the hero of Kokoto. The story of this battle took many settlements by storm. People all around the continent had been listening to the hero's tales with gleaming eyes and blushing cheeks, and hearing of his lonely battle of blood and sorrow finally lit a spark in even the most complacent listener. Before long, numerous amateur monster hunters roamed the lands, looking for glory in battle against fierce beasts. But hunting a monster is easier said than done, and many of these aspiring hunters met gruesome ends in distant monster caves and forest dens. A flame had been lit, but it threatened to consume all those that sought it out. To not waste this moment, another Wyverian made his move. The hero's brother, who had heard much of his siblings' exploits despite their frayed relationship. This brother used his logistical skills and vast network of associates to form a dedicated organization that would scout for monster incidents, assess the threat of the situation, and dispatch properly licensed monster hunters to the affected area, in return for economic benefits. This was the birth of the very first Hunters Guild, a system that would soon spread all across the continent. The guild enforced various rules on hunting, such as limiting the size of hunting groups to 4 members, a decision said to be influenced by the death of the hero's fiancée, who had been her troop's 5th member, a tragedy and an omen of death that lingered over the 5th slot. As unlicensed monster hunting became taboo and the requirement for certification drastically reduced the mortality rates of hunts, the benefits of the guild became increasingly apparent, lending it a wide and stable degree of authority across the frontier. Additionally, the slaying of monsters provided, for the first time, widespread access to rare and unusual materials found in their bodies, which were valuable enough to greatly stimulate the economies in the regions where the guild was active. And so, before long, local branches of the Hunters Guild began emerging in all corners of the land. With the sudden presence of professional monster hunters came also the need for equipment and weaponry, which had to be resilient enough to withstand the wild might of monsters. It was one of the hero's previous companions, the blacksmith simply known as Legend, that came up with the winning idea. If hunter gear had to match the power of monsters, why not make it from monster materials? It was his guidance and expertise that laid the foundation of armor and weapon crafting methods that relied on monster materials such as fangs, bones, and gems. A simple idea, but one that would define monster hunting for all time. This first generation of monster hunters was the stuff of legends. Within a short time, the idea of fighting back against monsters went from a pipe dream to a daily reality witnessed by many who saw hunters at work. Many powerful and distinguished hunters emerged in this period. One of them was an enormous Wyverian man from Dundorma, a descendant of the clan that had founded the town generations prior. This immense hunter was blessed with the gigantic body that some rare Wyverians possess, and with it, he wielded strength beyond human imagination. It is said that on one occasion, this warrior single-handedly battled a giant dragon at the gates of Dundorma, becoming a hero to his people in the process. This period gave rise not just to legendary hunters, but also to powerful and influential hunting towns and communities. One of the first cities to truly become a center of monster hunting was, ironically enough, Minegard, the backwater town that Weststrade had largely chosen to ignore. Its proximity to the frontier and strategic construction into a clifftop made it quite attractive for monster hunters, and before long, the original Hunters Guild branch settled down in this town. As a result, hunting activity increased rapidly, leading to an abundance of valuable materials that Minegard could trade with other Weststradian communities. This eventually led to Minegard becoming so wealthy that it could entirely detach itself from Weststrade's direct rule, becoming an autonomous city that nonetheless retains strong political and economic ties to the Western Kingdom. While they were mostly detached from the events in the frontier, the economic boom seen in places like Minegard was something that the authorities of Weststrade could not afford to ignore. In order to not let this moment pass them by, They thus chose to expand the Royal Academy, a scientific and educational institute that had served as a way to educate and employ the nation's aristocracy in topics such as natural sciences, engineering, and so on. The focus of this expansion was the creation of the Corps of Royal Paleontology Scriveners, a scientific body aimed at researching monsters and their ecology. The creation of the Scriveners thus allowed Westtrade to build a very natural relationship with all branches of the Hunters Guild. Hunters would send reports and samples to the Academy, where Scriveners would analyze them and compile ecological data on various monster species, which in turn would be adapted by the Guild as valuable notes and guides for hunters looking to slay those particular monsters. Many graduates of the Academy would also see themselves scouted by the Hunters Guild as quest receptionists and administrators, further deepening the bond between the Royal Academy of Shrade and the Hunters Guild. But while Mineguard and Westtrade were one of the earliest centers of influence in regards to monster hunting, they would soon see their rising stars eclipsed by a true capital of hunters. In Dundorma, the immense Wyverian who had previously been a powerful monster hunter was chosen as the next leader of the town, becoming henceforth known as the Grand Elder, or His Immenseness. Once given authority over Dundorma, his reforms were swift and extensive. The prayer hall of the town, which had previously served as a place of worship, was converted into an administrative center for the leader, being renamed into the Elder Hall. Next, the Grand Elder sent out a summons across the land. Any scholar or researcher with any expertise or knowledge on elder dragons was invited to Dundorma for a special meeting. Various settlements and remote villages housed these dragon scholars, wise Wyverians that tried to predict the appearance of dragons early enough to warn their respective regions, a task that had, so far, seen middling success. But once these scholars found themselves in Dundorma, they were offered a bold proposal: the formation of a specialized organization headquartered in this very town that would see them combine their efforts to research dragons more meticulously than ever before. Many scholars accepted the offer, and thus the Dragon Watch was formed. Using hot air balloons and carrier birds to survey a vast portion of the continent, this group of genius scholars represented the very first large-scale organized effort at understanding elder dragons and their mysterious ecologies. With the Dragon Watch established, the Grand Elder's next move must have seemed quite obvious: announce the creation of the Dundorman branch of the Hunters Guild. After all, a specialized research organization gathering insights on the most powerful type of monsters was sure to pique the interest of hunters, so establishing a guild office that could further employ and entice them was a fairly natural choice to make. The Grand Elder did, however, decree that the Dundorman branch would operate using a unique two-tier system. The town's tavern would double as a guild office, where novice hunters that had little to moderate experience could undertake quests in between drinks and merriment. This would encourage social bonds between hunters and also restrict new recruits to assignments that were unlikely to kill them. The second guild office would be stationed in the Elder Hall itself, personally overseen by the Grand Elder. Only hunters with an extensive record of successes would be allowed to enter and take on quests from this hall, which would represent the most challenging tasks the guild had to offer. This ensured that hunters in Dundorma would always have a goal to strive towards, pushing themselves to eventually be granted entrance into the Elder Hall. It also led to many expert hunters coming into direct contact with the Grand Elder, which would be crucial for his next reforms. As the presence of hunters in Dundorma grew, the Grand Elder moved his attention to the defenses and well-being of the city itself. He ordered the refurnishing of the battle quarters, an old defensive structure at the city walls that had been used by his ancestors as a place to repel monsters. After it had been fitted with powerful artillery, the Grand Elder further requested the establishing of other monster interception zones near Dundorma, which would function as satellite fortresses at which Elder Dragons could be fought and repelled before they got too close to the city, a strategy many other frontier cities would copy in later years. The Grand Elder furthermore encouraged more trade in monster materials, binding Dundorma's economy closer to the activities of his Hunters Guild. And lastly, the Elder made an offer to the expert hunters that were now able to enter his halls. He asked them to become Wardens of the City, a dedicated standing military force that would serve as protectors of Dundorma and enforcers of its law. Many hunters accepted the proposal and donned the now iconic blue chainmail armor, becoming the first iteration of what we now call Guardians. These reforms allowed Dundorma to become the unofficial capital city of the Hunters Guild, and the Grand Elder would come to be considered one of the highest authorities in the entire frontier. Following the reformation of Dundorma, the influence of the Hunters Guild would continue to grow, and even birth entirely new settlements out of its activities. One such example occurred when a group of scholars and hunters were sent out to investigate an old limestone mine, which turned out to actually be a massive deposit of ancient monster fossils. The sheer volume of samples to research led the scholars of this group to form their own dedicated team for this task, naming themselves the Wycademy. As they settled near the fossil deposit, their activities began to attract various workers looking for employment, such as smiths, miners, and engineers. These workers needed shelter, which in turn led to the building of small encampments which, over the course of many years, eventually grew into a proper village called Burna, where the workers of the Wycademy sleep and rest. Soon after the rise of Dundorma, Mineguard began to build its own Guardian Corps, as it had proven to be a beneficial idea in Dundorma. And while Mineguard copied the system of hiring hunters as city protectors in its entirety, the town also made a peculiar expansion. Among the Guardians, Mineguard appointed a special position called Guild Knights, which were master hunters that would be tasked with undertaking sensitive quests and serving the interests of the Hunters Guild. This was to be an extremely elite position, only held by 12 individuals at any one time. But while the world buzzed with excitement over monster hunting, the first monster hunter himself was undertaking a very different quest. It is unclear what the hero of Kokoto got up to during much of this period following his battle with the Monoblos, but when he next appears in the historical record, it is when he found love once again. The hero married a Wyverian woman and sailed the seas with her, accompanied by a crew of felines. But misfortune found him once more. The lover's vessel was attacked by an Akantor, a giant flying wyvern whose voice resounds with such force that it crushes stone. The ship was blasted from the tranquil sea and crashed onto a remote shore called Chico Sands. The Wyverian woman found herself stranded with the feline crew, but there was no sign of her lover. The hero of Kokoto had disappeared, his love having only one of his many swords to remember him by. As far as the historical record goes, the hero of Kokoto does eventually re-emerge on the main continent, although how he survived the shipwreck remains a mystery. What is known is that the hero returned to Mount Kokoto, where he had lost his first love, and plunged one of his swords into the soil at its foot. This was an old custom that heralded the beginning of a new village. And so, the hero retired by founding a small settlement near the site of his final victory, a sleepy town known as Kokoto Village. The hero himself became known as the Kokoto Chief, whose expertise in monster ecology made this small hamlet a surprisingly popular stop on many hunters' journeys, as they sought out the wisdom of this mysterious old man. But one place for which this era was one not of prosperity but of disaster was the Nameless Kingdom. For all its military might, it could not have prevented the mysterious appearance of a giant chasm in the capital city, nor did its weapons protect it from the wrath of two rampaging dragons. While their names were not known at the time, this was the first recorded case of a Malzeno battling a Geismagorm, presumably over control of the parasitic Curio, from which the latter dragon derives its power. Our records regarding the Nameless Kingdom are imperfect, but all sources agree that their battle was calamitous, and that it was a miracle that the kingdom was not completely wiped out as Shrade had been. The massive hole that appeared in the capital was later given the name Sun, and is considered to this day a reminder of an ill omen. And so, as the centuries passed and the dragon calamity retreated into the realm of fairy tales and folklore, the people of the frontier gradually pushed back against the threat of monsters. This was not merely a conflict stained in blood. The insights gained into monster ecology as a result of both the Hunters Guild and the Royal Academy's work allowed settlements to avoid monster problems before they ever arose, adapting to life in the wilds. The Dragon Watch's efforts further aided in avoiding catastrophes, with early warnings of Elder Dragon appearances becoming more reliable over time. But many mysteries still remained. One of them that truly puzzled the Dragon Watch specifically was the matter of natural death in Elder Dragons, namely, that it had never been observed. Some expert hunters had slain Elder Dragons as part of guild assignments, but old age or sickness-related deaths had not been recorded. Moreover, no one had ever even found a corpse of an Elder Dragon that had perished due to natural causes. Instead, the Dragon Watch had noticed the Elder Crossing, which to them seemed like a bizarre event in which Elder Dragons suddenly migrated away from the main continent and into the unknown sea. While the Dragon Watch and the Hunters Guild decided to observe and investigate, stories of undying dragons traveling out to sea stirred the imaginations of the common folk, until they eventually manifested into a kind of urban mythology. The most famous version of this myth tells of 5 dragons creating the world through their sacrifice, their bodies becoming the sea, the land, and the sky. This creation myth, derived from the real observation of Elder Dragon migrations, is what is now known as the Tale of the Five, the cornerstone for various spiritual beliefs all across the frontier. While the people dreamt of imaginary dragons, a real Elder Dragon began to make its move. Sharaishvalda, which had been traveling through the dragon veins for eons, moved closer to the surface for reasons beyond our understanding. This amplified the eerie sounds of its tendrils digging through the earth, and wherever it resonated loud enough to be heard on the surface, people spoke of the Earth Song and pondered what could be creating it. Eventually, this story too would become a popular myth, referring to the origin of this song as the Great Everworm. As the Hunters Guild established itself and its associate organizations became increasingly central to life in the frontier, more and more towns were able to spring up in the wilds. For one example, around 800 years after the Dragon Calamity, a Wyverian named Treshy and his sister ventured into the snowy mountains. They were the descendants of the Wyverian expeditioner that had disappeared centuries prior while chasing an Ukanlos. The twin Wyverians sought to honor their ancestor, and so decided to establish a new settlement where he had last been seen. They created a small town called Poke Village, a warm home among the silent blankets of snow. But make no mistake, the presence of the Hunters Guild did not suddenly tame the frontier lands. Quite the contrary, in fact. As more scholars and researchers penetrated into remote areas under the protection of monster hunters, it became clearer than ever that this wild world held mysteries beyond our most outrageous dreams. And often, those mysteries were guarded by powerful wardens. One such case occurred roughly 900 years after the Calamity, when the Hunters Guild and the Royal Academy authorized a survey into the lava caverns. This was an area that the scholarly community had long been interested in, as it was home to a volcano that bordered the sea, lava and water existing next to each other and thus supporting a unique combination of ecosystems. The presence of inexplicable ancient ruins was also of some interest to the Academy. But such a unique habitat also housed powerful, unusual monsters, which is why this survey could only be conducted once an appropriate detachment of hunters had been assembled. Once the survey team had landed in the area, they were quickly able to make some fascinating discoveries. But mere days after their landing, ominous signs began to manifest. Rumblings from the inner caves, aberrant monster behavior, an odd tension in the air. Finally, after a month, the lava caverns were beset by a monster stampede, a rampage caused by an eerie cry that emanated from within the volcano's depths. The researchers had to evacuate in a hurry, leaving scattered notes and questions behind. Today, we have more insight into what happened here. The rampage was the result of a narwhal that had been resting inside the volcano, its electrical discharges and cries agitating the monsters in the area into a frenzy. It seems that this female dragon was desperately calling for her mate, but he never arrived. The larva of the lava caverns perished without ever mating, and her skeleton can still be found in the cavernous depths of the region. But this was just a small taste of the upheaval that would be caused by another development that was occurring in the distant New World around this time. While the exact period of this event is unclear, it is estimated that at the latest around circa 930 ADC, a certain being infiltrated the everstream of the New World and laid various egg-like cocoons into its center. The same being also left a clutch of these same structures in the secluded valley under the Guiding Lands, near the Dragon Veins. These were dormant Jiva nymphs, an extremely bizarre species of elder dragon that feeds on the life-giving bioenergy itself. By sitting near the flow of energy produced by the Everstream and the Dragon Veins, these nymphs could thus absorb bioenergy directly as it passed near them, hastening their growth. The cocoons in the Everstream had the additional advantage of being able to absorb the energy released by elder dragons that perished in the Rotten Vale during the Elder Crossing. But some of the nymphs left in the Everstream found a way to gain even more power. By releasing a wide-reaching pheromone perceptible only to elder dragons and some wyverians, this nymph could trigger the Elder Crossing more frequently, thus artificially accelerating it. Suddenly, instead of only being fed pure dragon energy once every century, these cocoons would bathe in it once every decade. An ominous rhythm that foretold the coming of the Dark Light Dragon. It would be some time before this acceleration would be noticed by the guild. In 968 ADC, the Dragon Watch and the Royal Academy first proposed that the Elder Crossing was behaving unusually, and that this must be investigated due to the threat that elder dragons pose. After all, a migrating dragon is likely to leave a trail of devastation in its path, and these catastrophes happening every 10 years could quickly destabilize entire regions if they're unlucky. In response to this, the Hunters Guild authorized the formation of the New World Research Commission, which would be tasked with unraveling the mystery of the Elder Crossing, assuming it to lead to a new continent. This was a vast, interdisciplinary task that would take years to organize. Many early members of the Commission themselves joined in the belief that this was not just a way to research dragons, but an opportunity to finally discover the origins of the Tale of the Five. Consequently, many of the Research Commission's insignia, banners, and symbol reference this myth heavily. Around this same time, a lone adventurer became the first non-native person to set foot on the New World. Very little is known about this explorer, except that he was searching for the origin of the Earth Song and wished to discover the Great Everworm. His journeys took him into the western parts of the New World, the frozen expanse known as the Hinterlands, where he found a Velkhana nest and recorded his journey. While his ultimate fate remains a mystery, his writings would later aid in the further exploration of this region. The rise of the Hunters Guild had thoroughly transformed the world, giving people all across the lands structure and hope. And so, with the realization that the Elder Crossing had accelerated and the authorization of a research commission, the main continent buzzed with anticipation for this coming era, a time that would bring great discoveries and terrible challenges. If you enjoyed this video and are a fan of Monster Hunter more broadly, please consider checking out Guild Surplus, where me and a friend offer fan-made Monster Hunter goodies such as a replica Rathalos plate or parchment lore documents. Link to the website is in the description. Thank you. Thank you all so much for watching, as always. I would like to extend special thanks to everyone who supports the channel monetarily, either on Patreon or through YouTube channel memberships. A very special thank you to Admiral Frost, Alistair in Wonderland, Artur Centeno, Austin, Autumns, Big Mac, Black Ace 202, B, Bruggy, Chocolate Coat, Claire Miboon, Darkest, Destro, Dragonlord, Dissy, Echo but Evil, Ethan Toombs, Theopuz, Faye/Sleepy Tiki, Fjiden, Glitch NPC, Harpier, Hellbug Hunter, Hutsan, I'm Just Happy to Be Here, Inepts, Iron Camel, It's Robin Now, Jacob Coleman, Joey Tribby 58, Jonathan Ginsberg, Magenta, Carl de Crab, Kelly Barnett, Kogath, Lieferdienst, Logan Bilodeau, Lone Strider, Lufish, M1 Have 1 2, Macaroni Leviathan, Makamawi, Makot 02, Matt Hat 124, Meta Defiance, Mr. Pyramid, Molly Mockery, My Name Gone, Nico Soleil, Nils Schlatter, Noah Schantz, Oakwood Tree, Paige Gandalf Soda, Person 212, Precum King, Punonym, Quali, Quixotic Metroid 906, Rambling Robin, Raspberry, Regal Eagle, Resident Neko Arc, Wronger 97, Rose, Ryan Hook, Skiba, Shebo, Silly Wizard 97, Siragon, Sir Newt, Soruka, Tacti Wolf, The Alchemist, The Iciest Man Alive, The Dollarfish, Tigrex Chew Toy, Tsuki Midnight Boshi, Unkwith Good Puss, Uthduna is an Octopus, Wandering Soul, Wolf of Time, Zaffi, Lino Garcia, Zai Banded, Zion H.V. Augenson, and Kuroneko. Thank you all, and I'll see you around. Bye bye.